If you are struggling to pay off high-interest debt right now, you are temporarily operating with a 13-point drop in your IQ. That is the exact cognitive equivalent of losing an entire night's sleep. Your inability to budget isn't a lack of willpower. It's a biological reaction to a financial system engineered to trap you. Over the last 3 decades, the global macroeconomic landscape has fundamentally shifted. We are currently sitting on an astronomical $250 trillion in global debt. Within the Anglosphere, the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland household debt burdens have reached historic, destabilizing proportions. As central banks globally have synchronized their monetary tightening to combat inflation, the cost of servicing that debt has skyrocketed. We are facing overheated property markets, the aggressive spread of unsecured consumer credit, and a relentless cost of living crisis. Traditional financial advice tells you to just budget better and use math to solve your problems. But after decades in this industry, I can tell you unequivocally that conventional wisdom is fundamentally flawed. To understand why we fail, we have to look at the intersection of behavioral economics and the hidden structural design of financial products. Let's introduce you to Bob. Bob represents the average consumer in today's economy. He has a decent job, but he's juggling a car loan, an overheated rent payment, and 3 different credit cards carrying balances he can never quite seem to clear. Bob is trying to do the right thing. He listens to the mainstream financial gurus. He cuts out his $5 morning coffee. He tries to use rigid mathematical optimization to force his expenses down. He relies on unyielding willpower. But every month, Bob looks at his bank account and realizes he hasn't made a dent in his actual principal debt. He feels exhausted. He feels like a failure. But Bob isn't failing because he's bad at math. Bob is being sabotaged by 3 specific forces: psychological traps and economic villains that he doesn't even know exist. Today, we are going to deconstruct those villains, and I'm going to give you the exact framework to beat them. This is the fiscal fix you've been looking for. Let's look at fact number 1, the cognitive tax of financial scarcity. The foundational assumption of classical economics is that you and I are perfectly rational agents. Behavioral science completely disproves this. Financial stress isn't just an emotional burden. It is a profound physiological condition that alters the biological functioning of your brain. Researchers at Harvard and Princeton found that when you are preoccupied with urgent financial problems, like scrounging to pay a utility bill or navigating high-interest credit, you have drastically less mental bandwidth available. They proved this in a landmark study of sugarcane farmers in India. These farmers earn 60% of their income all at once during the annual harvest. This means they face severe financial scarcity right before the harvest, and financial abundance right after. When researchers tested the exact same individuals, their cognitive assessments plummeted during the pre-harvest scarcity period. The stress literally drained the glucose in their brain's frontal cortex, the area responsible for planning and self-control. The mental load of managing debt is a background app, running on your phone, constantly draining your battery. So, when people tell highly stressed individuals to just budget better, they are ignoring the biological reality that their cognitive architecture is temporarily compromised. Fact number 2, the minimum payment anchoring trap. Look at any credit card statement. You will see the total balance. But, front and center, heavily stylized, boxed and bolded, is the minimum payment due. The banks tell you this is to help you manage cash flow. That is a lie. It is a devastating psychological trap. This is rooted in the anchoring effect. When your brain sees a $5,000 balance but a minimum payment of $125, it unconsciously anchors to the $125. Your internal dialogue immediately shifts from "how do I eliminate $5,000" to "can I afford $125 this month?" By making the problem feel smaller, your urgency to act becomes smaller. Studies from the University of Warwick proved that when the minimum payment amount was deliberately hidden from statements, consumers intuitively increased their monthly payments by an astonishing 70%. Federal Reserve data shows that over 10% of active credit card accounts are making just the minimum payment. The anchor ensures you pay off less, maximizing the total interest the bank extracts from you over the next decade. Fact number 3. The empirical supremacy of the snowball method. For decades, finance textbooks championed the avalanche method, mathematically prioritized the debt with the highest interest rate to minimize capital loss. Economically, yes, it's the optimal strategy. But empirical data reveals a counterintuitive truth. In the real world, the mathematically suboptimal snowball method is vastly more successful. The snowball method means you pay minimums on everything, and throw all your excess capital at the debt with the absolute smallest balance, ignoring the interest rate entirely. A landmark study by the Kellogg School of Management tracked 6,000 individuals in debt settlement. They found that those using the snowball approach were significantly more likely to completely eliminate their entire debt. Why? Because of behavioral persistence and dopamine. High-interest debts usually have massive balances. The avalanche method can take years to yield the psychological satisfaction of a closed account. You get cognitive fatigue and abandon the budget. The snowball method hijacks your brain's desire for immediate reward. You close a small account quickly, you get a psychological win, and it builds unstoppable momentum. In the battle between raw math and human psychology, psychology wins every single time. Now we face the villains. First, the psychological villain: mental accounting and deprivation stress. Mental accounting is a concept by Nobel laureate Richard Toller. It explains how we subjectively categorize money. You might have $5,000 in a savings account earning 1%, and $4,000 in credit card debt costing 24%. Mathematically, you are bleeding wealth daily. But you refuse to use the savings to pay the debt because you categorize the savings as a safety net. Combine this with deprivation stress, the latte factor, the idea that cutting out small pleasures will make you riches. Mathematically deceptive and psychologically destructive. Cutting out a daily joy does not build meaningful wealth against systemic costs like skyrocketing rent. Instead, it generates intense deprivation stress. When you feel continuously deprived while making no headway on structural debt, you eventually succumb to revenge spending, or doom spending. This is heavily prevalent right now across Gen Z and millennials. You skip the $6 coffee for 3 months. The pressure cooker explodes. And you impulse buy a $2,000 vacation. The strict budget ultimately leaves you poorer. But you aren't just fighting your own mind. You are fighting the economic villain, interest exportation, and the shadow credit market. Historically, robust usury laws capped interest rates. In the US, this was dismantled by the 1978 Supreme Court decision, Marquette National Bank v. First of Omaha. This ruling allowed national banks to charge the interest rate of the state where they were located, not where the borrower lived. Banks instantly relocated to states with no usury limits, effectively exporting sky-high interest rates globally. Today, that villain has evolved into unregulated shadow credit. By now, pay-later schemes, apps like Klarna, Afterpay, and Affirm aggressively market paying-for installments. They exploit our present bias, our desire for immediate rewards over future costs. Because these apps frequently bypass formal credit bureau checks, you can effortlessly stack multiple loans across different providers. It's an invisible debt trap. You acquire massive liabilities without your total debt exposure ever becoming visible to the wider financial system until you default. Let's look at real-world proof of how structural intervention beats individual willpower. In the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority found 4 million accounts trapped in persistent debt, meaning consumers were paying £2.50 in interest and fees for every £1 they actually paid. Toward principal, the banks had zero incentive to help because these struggling customers were incredibly profitable. The UK had to step in and legally mandate that banks aggressively intervene and offer structured repayment plans. In Canada, the province of Quebec took direct aim at the minimum payment anchor. Historically, minimums were a predatory 2%. Quebec passed Bill 134, legally forcing a statutory ratchet. They systematically forced the minimum payment floor up to 5%. By neutralizing the cognitive anchor, this single legislative move compressed the amortization schedule of revolving debt and saved consumers thousands in long-term interest, completely bypassing the need for individual financial literacy. So, what is the golden thread? How do you actually win this game across any global market? You abandon the pursuit of mathematical perfection and instead build behavioral guardrails. Here is your 3-step blueprint. Default text and number 1. Automate the snowball. You must bypass motivation fatigue. Pay the smallest balances first, to guarantee the rapid dopamine hits your brain biologically needs to persist. But do not rely on your memory. Automate this entirely through your banking system, so progress continues, even when cognitive fatigue sets in. Number 2. Blind the anchor. You must actively ignore the minimum payment box on your billing statements. It is not a helpful suggestion. It is a trap engineered to keep you profitable to the bank. Manually override this anchor by setting your automated payments to a fixed, aggressive percentage at least 5% of the total balance, mirroring the Quebec model. Number 3. Pre-fund the doom spend. A sustainable budget cannot be purely restrictive. You must neutralize deprivation stress by pre-funding a guilt-free discretionary category. Treat your joy, your social experiences, and your stress relief as mandatory structural line items. This vents the psychological pressure cooker before it explodes into debt-fueled impulse buys. Balancing high-interest debt requires you to treat your own psychology as the most important variable in the equation. Build the guardrails, automate the discipline, and reclaim your financial trajectory.